Now that we've spent some time defining the field of gerontology and thinking about how gerontologists approach aging, we're going to shift gears slightly and focus on key concepts that form the foundation of the discipline. Gerontology relies on a shared set of terms, frameworks, and models that help scholars and professionals talk about aging in consistent and meaningful ways. In this lecture, we'll focus on two major areas. First, we'll take a deeper look at the demographic transition model, which is one of the most important population-level frameworks used in gerontology. Second, we'll review several other key terms and concepts introduced in your readings for this module, many of which will appear repeatedly throughout the course, and some of which were briefly mentioned in the last lecture. I want to emphasize up front that the goal here is not to necessarily master everything all at once. Think of this lecture as giving you a conceptual toolkit. These ideas will be expanded and revisited several times as we move through later modules, as we'll apply them to physical, psychological, social, cultural, and policy-related aspects of aging. Before diving into the demographic transition model itself, it's helpful to pause and ask, why does gerontology care so much about population-level change? Gerontology is interested not only in how individuals age, but also in how entire populations age over time. Population aging has far-reaching implications for healthcare systems, labor markets, social services, housing, transportation, and public policy. For example, an increase in the proportion of older adults affects demands for healthcare and long-term services, availability of family caregivers, workforce composition and retirement patterns, and public spending priorities. For those of you already in healthcare administration or related fields, and for those of you pursuing these careers, this population-level perspective is essential. Decisions about staffing, budgeting, program design, and policy are all shaped by demographic realities. As an example, if the proportion of older adult clients in a given health facility increases, it makes sense to increase programming to better cater to the needs of this growing demographic, which also means you may have to adjust the overall budget, hire new staff, or transition current staff, to name but a few considerations. As such, the demographic transition model is one of the primary tools gerontologists use to understand population aging and to better anticipate these changes. The demographic transition model is a framework used to explain how populations change over time as societies develop. At its core, the model describes a shift from high birth and death rates to lower birth and death rates, coinciding with a region's economic development. This results in changes to population size, structure, and age distribution. Importantly, the demographic transition model is not just about how many people live in a country. It's about who makes up the population, particularly in terms of age. As societies move through the stages of the demographic transition, improvements in healthcare, sanitation, nutrition, and living conditions reduce mortality, especially in early life. Over time, fertility rates also decline. These shifts ultimately lead to longer life expectancy and a growing proportion of older adults within the population. This is why the demographic transition model is so central to gerontology. We already know that the proportion of older adults across the globe is growing. The demographic transition model helps to explain why this change is occurring. The demographic transition model is typically described in stages. While different scholars may label or subdivide these stages slightly differently, the general progression remains consistent. In stage 1, societies have high birth rates and high death rates. Population growth is relatively slow, and very few individuals live into old age. These characteristics defined every nation on the planet up until the age of industrialization. However, Today, there is no country that can be described as a stage 1 country. In stage 2, as a region begins to industrialize, we observe that death rates begin to decline due to improvements in public health and medical care. Yet, while death rates decline, birth rates remain high. This leads to a rapid population growth as more people survive into old age, but the population is still relatively young overall due to the high birth rate. While most nations today have moved past stage 2 of the demographic transition model, there are some nations in the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa that can be defined as stage 2 countries. In stage 3, birth rates start to decline as social and economic conditions continue to change. Declines in birth rates are most often attributed to increased sexual health awareness and education, better access to contraception, and changes in the societal status of women, which leads to more women entering the workforce, delaying marriage, delaying childbearing, and choosing to have fewer children overall. Death rates remain low, though, and actually continue to drop, so population growth slows down, and the age structure begins to shift. Examples of stage 3 countries today include India and Mexico. In stage 4, both birth and death rates are low. Life expectancy is high, and a larger proportion of the population is made up of older adults. This is a stage where many high-income countries currently find themselves, including the US. Some scholars describe a hypothetical stage 5, characterized by very low birth rates and potential population decline. In these contexts, population aging becomes even more pronounced. However, it should be noted that stage 5 has yet to be observed in the real world. This is partially due to the fact that while the demographic transition model is able to estimate population growth based on birth and death rates, it does not account for other variables like migration patterns. As such, regions with very low birth rates haven't seen substantial population declines yet due to having a high number of immigrants coming in. It's important to note that not all countries move through these stages at the same pace, and not all societies follow the model perfectly. Cultural, political, and economic factors can influence demographic patterns in significant ways. As countries move into the later stages of the demographic transition, population aging becomes a defining feature. This doesn't just mean that there are more older adults in absolute numbers. It also means that older adults make up a larger proportion of the population. This shift has profound implications. Aging societies tend to experience increased demand for healthcare, long-term care, and social services. Changes in family structures and caregiving arrangements. Greater emphasis on chronic disease management rather than acute care. And economic and workforce challenges related to retirement and labor supply. Gerontologists use the demographic transition model to analyze these trends and to inform policies and programs that respond to the needs of aging populations. This model is also what underpins the discussion assignment in this module, where you'll examine where different countries fall within the demographic transition and what that means for aging-related challenges and opportunities. In addition to population-level frameworks, like the demographic transition model, gerontology relies on key concepts that help us understand the individual aging experiences within broader social contexts. One of the first distinctions emphasized in gerontology is the difference between chronological age and other ways of thinking about age. Chronological age refers simply to the number of years someone has lived. While it's easy to measure, it tells us very little on its own about a person's health, abilities, or needs. We often make assumptions based on a person's chronological age, but these are just that, assumptions, and possibly a reflection of our own ageist stereotypes or biases. Gerontologists also consider biological age, which reflects physical health and functional capacity. Psychological age, which relates to cognitive functioning and emotional well-being, and social age, which reflects social roles, expectations, and norms associated with different life stages. This distinction reinforces a central idea in gerontology. People age differently, and chronological age alone is an inadequate measure of aging. Another important conceptual distinction is between aging and old age. Aging is a process that unfolds across the entire life course. It begins at birth and continues throughout life. Old age, by contrast, is a socially constructed life stage. What counts as old when old age begins and what roles are associated with it vary across cultures, historical periods, and social contexts. As an example, in the US, we often define old age or older adulthood as when someone reaches the age of 65. This cutoff is due in large part to the age which, historically, US workers were eligible for Social Security benefits. Because Social Security is not a global program, different countries across the globe may have different definitions of what it means to be an older person. Recognizing this distinction helps gerontologists avoid treating old age as a fixed or uniform category, and instead focus on how social expectations and structures shape experiences in later life. Closely related to these ideas is the life course perspective, which is a foundational theoretical framework in gerontology. The life course perspective emphasizes that aging is shaped by timing of life events, transitions and turning points, historical and social context, and linked lives and relationships. This perspective highlights that experiences earlier in life, such as education, work opportunities, discrimination, or access to healthcare, accumulate over time and influence outcomes in later life. This should sound eerily familiar, as the life course perspective aligns closely with the gerontological imagination discussed in the previous lecture. This helps reinforce the idea that aging cannot be understood in isolation from broader social and historical forces. One final important concept we'll cover is that of successful aging, which is an important but often debated idea in gerontology. At a basic level, successful aging refers to maintaining health, functioning, and well-being in later life. As originally proposed, successful aging entailed avoiding disease and disability, high cognitive and physical functioning, and engagement with life. However, gerontologists are careful to treat this concept critically. Not all definitions of successful aging account for structural inequality, disability, or chronic illness, all factors which are out of control of the individual. There is an ongoing debate within the field about how to define successful aging in ways that are inclusive, realistic, and equitable. For now, it's important to view successful aging as a conceptual framework, not a prescription or moral judgment. We'll revisit this idea later in the course and explore how it can be applied and critiqued in policy and practice. Taken together, the demographic transition model and these foundational terms help gerontologists link population-level trends with individual aging experiences. The demographic transition model explains why societies age, and concepts like the life course perspective, different forms of age, and successful aging help us understand how people experience aging within those societies. Together, these tools allow gerontologists and professionals to design programs, policies, and systems that are responsive to diversity, equity, and real-world complexity. As we close this lecture, remember that these concepts are not isolated topics. They are building blocks that will support everything we explore in the weeks ahead. In the next module, we'll turn our attention to the physical and biological aspects of aging, where we'll examine how the body changes over time and how biological aging intersects with environment, behavior, and inequality. As you move forward, I invite you to reflect on this question. How might population aging, as explained by the demographic transition model, influence the systems or communities you currently work with? This concludes the second and final lecture in Module 1. If you have any questions about the material covered in this lecture, please contact your instructor for this course. Thanks for watching.
passive.